I sat in on one of the worst disciplinary meetings I had seen for a very long time. And when I say worst, it was one of those rare times that I was actually helping the employee. And boy, oh boy, was it handled poorly by the employer. It's actually easy for employers to get these meetings right. But I realized quickly that there isn't much out there for New Zealand businesses. So if you're going into your next disciplinary meeting, then this is how an employer and HR should prepare and handle that meeting when you're actually in the room. Stick around because this can't be missed. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lawlands. My name is Sanam and thank you so much for tuning in to the Employment Law Done Right podcast. This is a space where I help you get your people decisions right. I give you that legal thinking without the legal bill. So what are your thoughts? Have you ever seen a disciplinary meeting completely go south? Have you ever been involved in anything where it's escalated? I was so incredibly surprised, to be honest, when I was involved in that disciplinary. And like I said in the intro, it was one of those rare times that I was actually helping an employee and supporting them. And when I sat in on that disciplinary meeting and through the investigation and through the processes, at every turn, I was just thinking, my goodness, you need to listen to Lawlands. Because this was just insane. At every turn, I noticed accusatory language. I noticed that there was no structure to a feedback meeting in any way, meaning that the disciplinary meeting didn't have any questions that they specifically wanted to raise. And as a lawyer, we get very used to looking at both sides of the aisle. So we always prepare. And I had already figured out that most likely they wouldn't be asking these questions, but these are the questions that they could come back with and could try to raise in the meeting if they were trying to really get down to the bottom of what happened and they were trying to figure out if it was substantiated. What I found the most interesting was that even with HR in the room, the meeting was just completely out of structure. It was derailed. And I thought, look, if I can give you anything, I understand. I know I've been in those meetings myself on both sides as a private practice lawyer, as somebody helping out somebody close to them. And I know what it is like when those meetings start to go south. But that is why it's important to not only prepare for a meeting, which is what I keep seeing online. There's all this information around how to prepare, but how to actually handle yourself in the meeting and how you make sure that you keep control of that meeting is what we're going to tackle today. So if you're here for a whole preparation episode, I'm only going to touch on it a little bit. Today, we are diving deep into a very, very, very specific area of the disciplinary process, and that is actually how to handle the disciplinary meeting. Now, the disciplinary process, many of you may have heard about it. It is effectively a process that an employer undertakes to address and correct particular behavior in the workplace. And usually it's related to conduct that is not acceptable. So that's why they call it misconduct. And if it's substantiated, meaning that if you turn around and you find out that yes, this conduct did take place, then the employee may be given a sanction, like a written warning, a final written warning, or termination. All of those things can form part of the outcome of that disciplinary process. Now, usually when you get all your ducks in a row, you then look at presenting the allegations and evidence to an employee. That's where the disciplinary meeting comes in. So effectively, when you give them all those allegations, you're saying, hey, we want to get your feedback about this. The best way for us to do it is for us to meet and have a disciplinary meeting. And it's the forum, like I said, for the employee to provide that feedback and have everything laid out to them so that they can then come in and comment. Now, what it is and what it isn't is really important here as well. So when you're in that disciplinary meeting, it's not a sentencing, we're not doing the I object or, you're guilty or anything like that. It essentially is a fact-finding mission. You're there to find out what happened. You're not there to announce a decision. And most employers do get it backwards because you fall into these traps of when you're saying things, you convey them with such conviction. And it's just a normal human behavior. So this is where I think this episode goes a bit further and we're going to go beyond the law and we're actually going to look at what the law doesn't necessarily talk about, but what we see in cases, how these meetings should be handled so that you always meet the requirements, because it's important to understand that good faith needs to be riddled throughout this entire process. And what that effectively means is that you deal with the employee openly, honestly, and fairly. And it means that you don't have a decision all written down and ready to go before you've heard the employee's feedback and answers. And usually it is things like fraud, theft, and high serious misconduct that leads to those terminations. But when you're looking at that, if a dismissal ends up in front of an authority member at the Employment Relations Authority, which is usually where most things go if it can't be settled at mediation, then they will apply one test. They will look at section 103A, which is basically the test of justification. And what they are testing is whether your actions and the way you acted was what a fair and reasonable employer could have done in those circumstances at that time. So if you look at the entire situation, could have done is the bar. Not should have done, not would have done, it's could have done. And there's a range there, and that's what could means. So you just have to land inside of it. Essentially what the authority does is it gives you a bit of a checklist. And this checklist is what I think is the real secret sauce. It's what's going to make your disciplinary process a chef's kiss moment. With that said, let's look at what those specific areas are. The first one is, did you sufficiently investigate the allegations before you acted on anything? So did you take the time to look at all of the information, gather your facts, and then put it to the employee? 2, did you raise your concerns with the employee before you acted? So did you put this to the employee for them to really understand? 3, did you give the employee a reasonable opportunity to respond? So the whole idea that you need to actually sit down with this employee and get some feedback from them. Get them to put something in writing if they don't want to meet, but to have at least the opportunity presented to them is the most critical thing. And then the fourth part is, did you genuinely consider their explanation? It's always okay. I understand human nature is that you're sitting there and you're going, you're looking a little bit dodgy in this situation, so I don't know if I entirely trust you. And I do think that maybe you might have done this. You can formulate all of those ideas in your head, but you still need to take the time to genuinely consider their explanation. Every one of those 4 points that I mentioned is about getting information out of the employee and actually using that information to figure out if the allegations are substantiated. Not one or the other. It's about making sure that all of those are satisfied. And so what that looks like in practice is, let's say that you're putting an allegation to an employee. You wouldn't say that we've had some issues with the till. That's not an allegation. That's just a bit of a statement, a bit of a mood. It's a vibe. But what is an allegation is it is alleged on the 14th, the 22nd, and the 29th of April, the till was short by $340. You closed on all 3 of those nights. It is also alleged that no one else approached the till between the time of 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. The CCTV footage shows you at the till alone at 9:47 p.m. after it was closing time, putting what looks to be cash in your pocket. Now, when you put this allegation to the employee, you can see it's still on a bit of shaky grounds, because it's a question of, is anybody else working on that shift, or was it even money or paper? But when you look at what you're doing, you're pieced all this information together, you're putting it to the employee, and now you're getting them to genuinely provide their feedback. Now, before you go into that meeting, there's a few things that I want you to really think about. And the reason why I'm asking you to think about it is because at the end of the day, it makes for a meeting that is smooth sailing. And these are the few things that you need to check off. So first things first, pick your decision maker. Who is going to be making the decision? Because the person that investigated, they ideally shouldn't be the ones that are the decision maker. If the same person who gathered the evidence, formed a view, runs the meeting, and then makes a call, the employee can easily and successfully argue that the outcome was never genuinely open. If you don't have the ability to do that and you're running a small operation and you can't split the roles, be honest with yourself about whether you can walk in and actually have an open mind. Make sure that there's no bias creep and nothing like that happens. And watch the numbers in the room. So there's no fixed number when it comes to the head count or who the employee can bring, but you have to offer in these circumstances the ability to bring a support person or a representative. And if the employee is deciding to bring one, make sure you find out who that is beforehand. So you need to make sure that you confirm the support person or the situation specifically in advance. And that just makes for an easier meeting for you because you won't have any new players in the room. You know exactly who's coming. coming. If you have a lawyer coming in, that's a very different expectation compared to an advocate, for example, or a support person, for example. If an employee brings in a support person or an advocate, one of the key things that I do is confirm what capacity that person is in. Because a lot of times the employee can turn around and say, whoa, I didn't say any of these answers. So it's best to confirm in the beginning, are you going to be the one that is speaking on the employee's behalf, or are you there to just provide moral support? It's good to set that standard and make sure that you have that written in the meeting minutes or recorded somewhere around the employee giving that confirmation. Now, speaking of meeting minutes, you always need to make sure that there is somebody that is taking notes. It's very hard for you to do the meeting and take notes at the same time. You also have note-taking apps and everything now as well. With that said, though, keep in mind, if you are recording the meeting and actually doing a voice recording, then you need to make sure that you get consent from everyone in that room when I'm talking about the employer recording, right? So you need to make sure that you have told them under the privacy legislation that you want to record and that you get their express consent to record. And make sure that is noted in the recording, or it's even mentioned in the meeting notes if you're doing that. Where I would say be careful, because LawLens is all about speaking to you, the employer, and HR and the leaders. It's about making sure that when you hit record, your meeting is ironclad, follows the structure, and it does not derail on the employer's part. Because as soon as that happens, now you have something on the record which has jeopardized and undermined the entire process. It's important to make sure that you feel very confident in your abilities and you can execute on this kind of meeting. Now, that's not to say be scared, because what we're going to go through today, this is going to set you up for success. I promise you, it really, truly will. So remember, we're dealing with the meeting now. This was all of the things that you need to think about that directly relates to handling that meeting. Now we're talking about the practical application and what to ask in the meeting. So let's talk about preparing the questions before you walk in. The single biggest mistake I see is that employers prepare an outcome and they really wing the questions. Flip it. Walk in with no fixed outcome and walk in with a list of written questions. You can absolutely do that. Be careful. Don't have answers written in there or anything like that, because the employee can ask for that information because it has their personal information on there and they can ask for it under the Privacy Act. So don't have anything incriminating, but have a written list of questions and build your questions off specific allegations, not off of a template that you found online. The best thing to do is to layer the questions based on your allegation. So in that specific scenario that we had around the CCTV footage and the theft, the first layer would be the open door. So you want them talking in their own words before you even try to move them in any kind of direction. What you would say is, walk me through what happened on the night of the 22nd, from when you started to when you closed. Open, not closed questions. Then the next layer after that is going in a bit further, probing a little bit more. Now go into the detail that concerns you. You would ask things like, please confirm that you've had the ability to see that CCTV footage. That CCTV footage shows you back at the till at 9:47 after you'd done the cash up. What were you doing during that time? You're not accusing them. You're asking them to account for a specific fact, not why were you behind the till during that time? What were you doing during that time? Then layer 3 is to put it to them. The one thing that employers skip and the one that actually saves you as an employer is putting the allegation to them and giving them the chance to answer it head on. The concern we've put to you is that the shortfall lines up with your shifts and the footage shows you alone at the till after close, putting what looks to be cash in your pocket. What's your response to that? And then the employee can go in and add in what they've got to say and provide their feedback. The biggest mistake I see is that an employer goes in, and this is exactly what happened in the scenario that I was dealing with. The HR advisor, as well as the manager, the regional manager, both came in and said, hey, what is your feedback? And then as soon as I started asking questions, they blew up and it completely went out of control. They shouldn't have led with what is your feedback. That is such a general thing to lead with. That is where it gets into the territory of either you get the information so that you can make a sound decision, or you've gone in and formulated an idea and you're just saying, hey, what's your feedback? You may have a solid case and you may know 100% in your heart of hearts that the employee has done this. But until you run that fair and thorough process where you actually ask questions, you're doing yourself a disservice by undermining your disciplinary process. And to a certain degree, you're not doing right by the employee as well, because you're not giving them a fair process where you can really hang your hat on it and go, look, we did everything by the book and we asked the questions that we needed to ask to get the outcome that we needed to get to, which was finding out if this was substantiated or if this was not substantiated based on the evidence, based on the feedback, all of that. And there's been many times in my career where the employee has provided feedback and it's actually completely changed the trajectory of the disciplinary. That's exactly the groundwork that I built on the front foot on. And it's open for booking right now. It's lawlands.co.nz. I love getting in the room, getting everybody stuck in. And that is what this is all about, because you cannot learn this in theory. You have to do it practically. And that's what we do at Lawlands. Check out lawlands.co.nz. But now we'll move on to the practical application for the next stage, which is asking those open questions and then narrowing it down, but never leading questions. So let's see what that looks like. Open questions will always get you information. Better than saying, are you doing all right today? Yep, I'm all right. Versus, how have you been today? What's been going on? Asking those open questions will always help you get more out of the situation. And the best way I can explain it is that a leading question kind of smuggles your conclusion into the question. You knew this was against policy, didn't you? You've just told the authority that you've already decided. And that was one of the things that came up in the situation that I was dealing with. If you compare that, what I just said, to what's your understanding of the cash handling policy? Same territory, no predetermination. And in the situation that I was dealing with, it was very much like that. Why did you answer this question in this particular way if you knew that the policy said this? Very accusatory. And when you look at what answers you get, the answers that you're getting are more useful as well, because you find out if the employee actually knew and you find out if they blatantly disregarded those rules. And so you start every topic with, tell me, or walk me through, or help me understand. Let them talk. Then you narrow into the what, when, who, and how. So save the why for a very careful moment, because saying things like, why did you do that, can sound like you've already found them guilty. Instead, it would be, help me understand what was going through your mind. Get the same answers without the accusatory edge. And then the most underused technique, I think, and this is going to sound awful, is just be quiet. I always say, zip, zip, shh, nothing, don't say anything. You ask the question and then you stop talking. But silence does a lot more work than a lot of the questions that will follow will. And so when you try to fill the silence, you start going off script. That's why it's best to just ask and sit in the silence. Help me understand what was going through your mind. Shh. See? When you take that time out to consider what they had to say, you see it's something that you have to be able to prove. If the employee gives you an explanation, you have to engage with it in the room. You've said that you went back to the till to grab your phone charger. Let me make sure I've got that right, and then test it. Don't just nod and move to your letter, because that is the only time, that is the only moment you'll be able to test this. If their answer opens a door that you didn't expect, still go through it. Maybe there's a second person near the till that you didn't know about. Ignore that because it's inconvenient, and now you've failed to genuinely consider everything. Let's not focus on Tim that was by the till as well. Let's focus on just you, because we've got CCTV footage of you at 9:47 hanging around there. Something that can come up is that you can ask the employee what you want to ask them, but they might turn around and they might say, no, I don't want to comment on anything. I have nothing to say. If that's happening, then you can only push so far, and you can only give them a chance to speak in that meeting, provide them with the opportunity to put things in writing if you want to do that. But you give them the chance and record down that you have done that. And if they decline, they decline. And the last area that I really want you to have a look at and to think about, making sure that you run it properly, because choreography matters. So when you see the setup of the meeting, I would say have two people on your side of the table. You're going to be there, maybe a note taker, and one runs the meeting and asks the questions and the other one takes notes. Try to do both and you'll do neither. So you'll miss the thing that will matter the most, usually when you're having to write your own notes. And so those notes should stay as close to what people have said as possible and open the meeting the same way every time. It's best to confirm who's in the room, confirm that they've had time to read the allegations and to look at the evidence, and confirm that they know the possible outcomes, including the fact, if you're in a serious misconduct situation, that dismissal is on the table, and confirm that they've got their support person there or their representative. And if they don't have someone there, make sure that you've got it on record that they're happy to proceed without one. And that opening, it's to get confirmation. You are building the record that the process was fair and that you asked the questions about conduct all after you got the confirmation and the go ahead. Then hand them the floor. I want to take you through each concern, and at every point, I want your response. Please take your time. Now, another thing, and I would say that this is like the fifth area that you need to have a look at when you're looking at the practical application, is knowing the order that you need to ask the questions, because the order that you ask questions changes the order that you get your answers in. It's best and easiest to take a chronological approach. Do not take a scattergun approach. So people remember things better in sequence. Always remember that. So the background before specifics is the best way to start out. You start wide, your chronology, and then you narrow it. So you would say something like, talk me through how the close normally works on your shift. Then narrow to the night in question. You learn what normal looks like before you ask them to explain the exception. Understand, on the balance of probabilities, looking at whether at a 51% effectively, this misconduct did take place, the way that you can build that is to clearly show that this was how an employee normally handles a situation, how the policy lays out what is required of them, and then third, what they did on that particular day. So one allegation at a time is very important. You fully work through one concern at a time, get the response. Stacking 3 or 4 allegations together into one question, it lets them answer the easy one, and then they can just skate on past and glide on past the other two. If there are any inconsistencies, this is another thing that a lot of people shy away from in the meeting because it's hard. You're doing a level of confrontation. It's not necessarily confrontation, but it can feel like that in the moment. It's important that you put the inconsistencies to the employee, but not as a gotcha moment. Nobody's going, haha, I knew you were doing this. It's none of that. It's earlier you said you left at 9:47. The clock out log says 9:40. Help me understand the difference. You're giving them the chance to explain. If they say the till was already short when they started, ask them how they know that, whether they told anyone, whether it's in the handover notes. You can't ever say that you genuinely considered everything. That is where in any process, an employer can become undone. Another area of practical application that I would say that really helps in the meeting is knowing the 4 question types that you need to have. The first one is walk me through what happened. Use this to start every topic. The probing questions are what happened next? Who else was there? How did you deal with the shortfall? These are the follow the thread questions where you're looking at what they've handed you and you just use them to follow the thread that they've just given you, basically. The close questions are, so the till was your responsibility that night. Is that correct? And leading questions, remember, have no place here. You knew that broke the policy, didn't you? That's not a question. That's your verdict. Mostly open and probing questions, a few closed to confirm, and 0 leading questions. If you've prepared a list and that's mostly closed questions, you've written an interrogation and it's not an inquiry. I want you to remember that you have to close the meeting without completely shutting off and closing your mind. And it's important that you close that meeting without delivering an outcome. I had that come up in the meeting, believe it or not. And I was sitting there going, what? They turned around and said, so we're going to stop the meeting and we're going to see what the outcome's going to be, and then we'll jump back on in 5 minutes. And I'm just sitting there going, you don't want to take a day? You don't want to have a think about it tonight? You don't think I've laid out anything better than how you've run your process? And they came back and said they can't make a decision. They said that they needed a couple of days. They actually delayed that further. But what I want to say to you is that it's important to make sure that when you're leaving that meeting, you say it plainly before they leave, that I'm not making any decision today. I'm going to consider everything you've told me. No decisions have been made. And I'm going to come back to you with a preliminary view, a proposed outcome. And you'll get a chance to respond to that too. That's the 2-step outcome. First, a preliminary decision in writing with reasons, and then their feedback on it. And then, only then do you get to your final decision. Okay, now I want to just quickly wrap up and talk about the areas that I've noticed sink employers the quickest. One is that they have a predetermined outcome to the point where they've even got the dismissal letter or the warning letter drafted. And I noticed that a lot of times they will jump ahead and they'll prepare everything for the manager and get it all ready to go. But all the employee needs to do is a Privacy Act request, and you'll need to supply that information. And they'll see very clearly that on this particular day, let's say it was the 1st of August, what do they have? They've got a very clear day that the invite was written, also the final decision was written, and also the proposed outcome. Another thing is testing the language. Make sure you're not saying things like, when we let you go. Instead, it should be, if we decide to. One sentence like that can actually ruin your whole entire process, and it can undermine it. Another thing is withholding information. So this does come up from time to time, and my tip to you would be, if you've got CCTV footage, if you've got information that you are relying on, you need to make sure that you are supplying that to the employee. Do not withhold that information. One of the key requirements of good faith is giving them all of that up front so that they can provide their feedback and comment on it. You can't ask someone to respond to CCTV that you won't show them. Even if it is witness statements or summaries of witness statements, you can give them that information as long as the person that was a witness is very much okay with that statement going ahead. And rushing the clock will be another thing that I see time and time again. Can we just have the meeting tomorrow? It's only been 18 hours notice. It should be fine, right? No, 2 to 3 working days for notice is the best way to move ahead with a disciplinary meeting. Never offer a resignation as the softer option. That is a constructive dismissal, risk, and huge liability waiting to happen. We're not making any decisions today. I'm going to consider everything you've told me and come back to you with a preliminary view. And you'll get a chance to respond to that too. That kind of approach is the best way to do it. If your last disciplinary process has left you a bit unsure and you're thinking, have I got this right? Did I say the right thing? What do I do when the employee brings up mental health, or they've now accused the person that has raised the complaint about bullying them? And usually those things come up for the HR team. So that is what Out of the Gray is built for. It's built to get you out of that gray area and to get you on the line that you need to straddle so that you understand what you need to do in those curlier situations. It's open now for booking, lawlens.co.nz. Go and check it out. The last thing I want to say before I wrap this all up is make sure that your disciplinary meeting is an inquiry, not a sentencing. Make sure that you are looking at section 103A, which is making sure that you investigate, you raise those concerns, give a real chance to respond, and genuinely consider those answers by the employee. Ask those open questions, then narrow down but never leading questions. And if you take one thing away from today, just one thing, the quality of your questions is the quality of your defense. A pre-written dismissal letter is not a process, and a good question in this scenario is going to be your smoking gun. So the next time cash goes missing, or you've got an employee that's falsifying timesheets, don't walk in and ask if they've done anything wrong. Walk in and ask them to walk you through what happened in that situation. You'll get the truth, and you'll also get a process that holds up. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you ever need help with any of these or have questions, LawLens is only ever a DM or an email away. Well, thank you so much, everyone. That is it from me. I hope you have a lovely morning, evening, night, whatever it may be, and I will catch you in the next one, everyone.